Hello, welcome back to Business and Technology in Tennessee, podcast brought to you by InfoSystems. I'm Josh Davis, the Marketing Director at InfoSystems, and very happy to welcome a couple of special guests today from Ridgeline Venture Law. And I was introduced initially to this company through the Chattanooga Technology Council. You guys recently sponsored one of the Connect events that they do, kind of their monthly gatherings, and had a really nice introduction to that. We got to hear from a couple of outdoor technology companies, but you guys aren't necessarily technology, you are legal advice for people in and around technology. So if you don't mind, just introduce yourselves real quick. We can start with you, Michael, and then we'll get into a little bit about how lawyers can help in technology.
Sure.
So my name is Michael Summers, and I'm a corporate and intellectual property attorney at Ridgeline Venture Law. And I came here to Chattanooga about 5 months ago at this point. And,
Newbie.
Exactly.
So, yeah, right on. Welcome to Chattanooga.
I'm Kevin Christopher. I'm also a corporate and intellectual property counsel at Ridgeline. And I relocated to Tennessee from the Bay Area, California about 2 years ago.
Well, so pretty fresh to the area as well. So
yeah,
we're happy to take transplants, whether it's from Europe or the West Coast. You know, could be California to around here seems sort of like Europe to people. So
yeah,
you know,
for sure.
Yeah, some people consider it more foreign.
Yeah,
depending
even
on
more
who you're
foreign
talking
than Germany. But hey, right. So Ridgeline Venture Law, you guys do intellectual property counseling. So let's talk a little bit about that, just for people who aren't going to understand at all what is intellectual property and why does it need to be protected. What would you say to that person?
Sure. So I'll lead off and just say we like to say that we practice entrepreneurship, intellectual property, and technology law, and that sounds like a lot, but we do think it's pretty specific. Of course, most of it does revolve around intellectual property, which is really everyone understands the fundamental concept of intellectual property. They just may think that it's a lot more dense. It arises out of property law. So if you understand the concept of a backyard, that you have a particular space that is private and exclusive to you, and that you can keep others out of that space should you choose to by various means. You can build a fence or put up some barbed wire if you need to. Then
high security
backyard. Then you can understand intellectual property law. It's really about identifying what things are valuable and unique and proprietary to you, and then creating the proper structure to keep others from practicing that so that you can monetize it appropriately.
Okay, so I'm starting to get a picture of what in technology intellectual property rights would probably touch, and that's if you're talking about technology that you actually develop and you plan to base a business on, you're going to help people protect that. Now, I took some copyright law classes when I was in college, and you know, I was in and around some intellectual property type stuff. I have a decent understanding, but just for today's episode, since a lot of the audience, mainly business people around Chattanooga who may not deal with intellectual property at all, maybe they do, maybe they don't. You know, I'm just going to kind of play dumb and let's take this from the very foundation. So I'm starting to get a picture of intellectual property, why you would want to protect it, but what types of things would a technology company or an entrepreneur who's in the technology space be building that needs to be protected?
Sure. Well, intellectual property law actually breaks down into different categories.
Okay.
And they're separate and distinct, but they also intermix and have rights that kind of blend together.
Yeah.
And that's copyright, as you mentioned, trademark, patent, and trade secret.
Okay.
And so copyright essentially is an artist's right in expression. So that could be a right in your literary work, a right in your music that you're making, any artistic work that you're putting together, a sculpture, a play, any artistic expression. It doesn't protect the idea, but the expression itself,
Right.
The creative expression behind it. And that's copyright generally, logos as well, and that's where it's going to kind of come into trademark law a little bit. But that's generally for the graphic designer, the artist, the creative. Then you get into trademark law, and there's a lot of intermixing between these two, and that's a right to use a logo, for example, or a word mark, or a slogan in business, in commerce. And there's a lot of intermixing here that you can see as someone gets a logo designed, and there's a copyright right in the designer. It automatically vests in the person who created that logo. But then someone takes that and wants to trademark it, and they can do that. So one person owns rights in the copyright, another person has a registered trademark in that, and that's their use in commerce. This is their rights in the creative expression of that logo. But because those rights can be conflicting, it can cause issues down the road as far as licensing goes. If you're building a company, whether it's a tech company, a product company, whatever that is, and you want to license those rights to that trademark, and you're fighting with someone who owns the actual copyright with it. So there's a lot of interplay as far as patent goes and technology. That's Kevin's space. I think he can bounce off on that.
Yeah, and within technology, you can think about the different kinds of technology, like the Chat Tech Council is not just about coders, right? It's about people involved in energy technology, biotech. There are all kinds of technology. And some of them defer or utilize certain IP methods over others. In the biopharma industry, for example, patent rights are nearly everything. And that's kind of why drugs can cost so much, is because it takes so long to get a drug to market in terms of the research and then getting FDA approval, that those drug companies have to make their money back quickly before their patent rights expire. In the tech space, which we may think of in terms of coding, developing some software, you have issues that pop up all the time for us and our clients in someone using a shop to do the initial coding, or building off of some sort of open source platform. In coding, you are developing some copyright rights because software is a creative expression. The code is a creative expression and qualifies for copyright registration. But then you may want to consider trying to patent that, which is kind of difficult. It can be, depending upon what the software's purpose is. Or you may want to protect it under trade secret, and you may not want to register it with the Copyright Office or disclose it to the Patent Office, because you don't want anybody to have access to that code and reverse engineer it. So sometimes we work with clients at the outset and kind of go through a due diligence and mapping process of how did you build this technology? What was the origin point? Who all was involved in it? How are you going to market it and monetize it? And then we can think about what strategies and what rights we should pursue and try and perfect in order to allow that client to make the most out of that technology.
Now, we've talked about your background from Germany, from the West Coast. How come you guys are here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, working together with Ridgeline Venture Law? How did that happen?
Sure, you came first.
Yeah, so I'm grandfathered in, I suppose. So so I am a Nashville native. And I'd spent the last 10 years in the Bay Area, and my wife and I decided that we wanted to relocate to Tennessee. And Chattanooga was the ideal place. Lots of great culture here, which is really overlooked. But it is attractive and is equally attractive, I think, as the outdoor scene, the low cost of living, and all these things that the young entrepreneurs are talking about right now, and the reasons why so many people are coming from outside the area. But I wanted to build a law practice that was a little bit different from the traditional practice of law.
Well, I got to say, I mean, looking at you two guys, you scream just by your appearance, lawyer. This is exactly what I think of when I pick,
Well, we're just not.
A little tongue-in-cheek there, I guess.
Yeah, definitely don't look like the traditional lawyers. Okay,
Right.
so keep going, sorry.
Yeah, no, please. So I had a vision of building a law practice that is in this case unique to Tennessee. We are the only certified B Corp law firm, and that means that we practice in a way that uses a triple bottom line business model. We strive for being exceptional in the practice of law, but also being good in our community, and being aware of the social and environmental impact of our work. And I just was fortunate to find Michael, who shared a vision for practicing law that way, and was able to convince him to ditch Germany and all the many wonderful aspects of living in Europe that he can tell you more about, and more or less recruited him to Chattanooga.
Yeah. So I actually, to start, I was a lifer at University of Tennessee. So I'd lived in Tennessee before. I went to undergrad there, law school there, and that was actually the longest I'd lived somewhere. So I did start to call East Tennessee or Knoxville home for me, as long as it wasn't from anyone from Knoxville, because they're like, you're not from here. But for anyone else, that was. But after that, I moved out to Germany to take my first job out as a lawyer for a multinational company out there as in-house counsel. And I was out there for a couple years, and it was time to come back. And of course, I was looking at the cities that you would think. I'm really into the outdoors, and I looked at Boulder and Denver and Portland and Seattle, all those cities I thought would maybe fit my lifestyle as I transitioned back to the U.S.
Yeah.
But at first I was looking to come back to the U.S. because while it's wonderful to be in Europe, it's a slower pace, you're taken care of, it's a social state, it's great. But there's something about the U.S. in general, but also, I'll get to it a little bit, specifically Chattanooga, that there's this, and it's a trite phrase, but there's a spirit of innovation here. People want to create new products and have new ideas and are able to really pursue those ideas. And that was something I did miss a little bit in Europe. Now it exists, but on a different scale.
Right.
And I really wanted to get into that space as quick as possible.
Yeah, I've only been to Europe once for about 2 weeks. So I can't speak from a lot of experience, but I would imagine that the mindset, I mean, the American culture, you're just sort of steeped in the mindset of, what they used to call the American dream. You don't really hear that phrase anymore, but now it's just more about innovation and entrepreneurship and things like that. It's just, we have the mindset of building new things, where it just sort of feels like in Europe, everything's about tradition and the culture that's in place and not really a look to the future. It's like, I almost felt like in Italy, where I visited, that everyone was just really content with the way things are right now. And there's not this huge push to innovate and enact change. It's just like, hey, this is great. We're having a good time in Italy. We've got great food, great culture, good music, fun times. And where in the United States, it's more like there's not one unifying culture other than we've always been a very progressive society.
A hustle and a grit that's here.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, you got it right on. And it is nice. Like, those are nice things that you're taken care of, and you can sit there and sip your espresso and look at all the beauty and relax. But yeah, it was time. We have that here. And I think that is the new, probably, American dream.
Yeah.
Unless it was before, but it definitely is today. And yeah, that was a big draw to start looking. And that's when I found Ridgeline. And we kind of found each other. And it, of course, as Kevin talked, it's doing law in a different way. Part of that being the B Corp certification. But that really caught my eye as a potential. And that's when I started to look into Chattanooga. I think I'd been to Chattanooga one time very quickly, but I didn't know anything about it. So a lot of it was on Google searches. And I was like, well, wait a second, there's a lot going on in this city. So I'm basing a lot of this off of what I'm reading on the internet, and the publicity for Chattanooga is great.
We've had fantastic PR for the last decade or so. So yeah,
and it works well. And I was like, well, there's a law firm set up like Ridgeline there. Like there's got to be something going on, and that's exactly what I'm looking for when I'm coming back to the U.S. And I'd already lived in Tennessee before, so it was kind of a natural move. And then now as I've been here, all the stuff that I read online, it really is there. I mean, this is a city of grit and hustle, and people are wanting to create new products and start new businesses, and you're always out there, and everyone has a new idea, and it's exciting. And it's really juxtaposed right next to my experience in Europe. It's just two opposites.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the two of you guys and what it sounds like Ridgeline Venture Law is, which is a really non-traditional legal practice, you're doing obviously legal work that's very relevant and modern and everything, but you're doing it in a way with your company culture and the way you present yourselves and where you founded the company in a way that's non-traditional. And if you look around Chattanooga right now, you see that happening in many places. I mean, there are accounting firms, insurance brokerages, other types of companies popping up who are doing that similar thing. Like, we don't really have to fit the mold of decades and centuries of accounting practice or law practice. We can be ourselves and, sort of push the boundary on what a company looks like, but still provide a fantastic product and be great to work with. And and as you all said, with the B Corp, or was it B Corp?
B Corp, exactly.
Really have that focus on being good stewards in the community and things like that. I mean, that's fantastic. I want to talk a little bit more about that entrepreneurial spirit of innovation that's going on right now. I mean, obviously in intellectual property where you all work, you're probably doing the right thing at the right time. I would assume, with all the technological innovation and new entrepreneurs launching new ventures, that there's plenty of work out there for you guys. But what is your perspective of Chattanooga and even Tennessee as far as entrepreneurship and where we stand? Give me a little insight from your point of view.
So I was just flipping through a report yesterday by our friends at Powder Keg, and it's called the Tennessee Tech Census Report 2018. Great report, highly recommend checking it out. Did kind of a deep dive across the state, focusing on some of the different metropolitan areas, Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga, and then comparing some of the different norms, different trends in entrepreneurship. And one of the things that you see in discussing Chattanooga is that I think a statistic I read was that of all the survey respondents, entrepreneurs who were interviewed, and there were hundreds of them across the state, believe 55% of the Chattanooga respondents said that their revenue grew over 80% last year. So you have a very, very thriving entrepreneurial scene in Chattanooga in particular. But even in those other areas, it was at least 20%. So you have some fast-growing companies, and that tells me that these are perhaps sustainable companies that are going to last in the community. Historically, in Tennessee, you had good opportunities for companies to launch, but not to scale.
Right.
So, Feats is a good example. A company that can launch with technology out of Oak Ridge, but there's just not that financial ecosystem to be able to grow and stay here. But I see that changing. I mean, a lot of these companies are sticking around. A Unum type. I mean, they're going to grow the community and spin off new companies, and that's what we want to see.
I mean, not only financial ecosystem, but there's just not even, if you're talking about a consumer product like Feats launched, there's not enough consumers in this area. It's just not a dense population. So if you go to the Bay Area, where you have a couple 100,000 people here, you've got millions there right at your doorstep that you could potentially launch to. So, you know, that's understandable that people like that would relocate. But then you've got companies that launch here that are very relevant to this area. I mean, if you see what's happening in logistics and Chattanooga and the Southeast, you know, where we're situated, has always been a key logistics hub. But it seems like now it's even scaling well beyond what you would have thought.
Right.
You know, and especially with some of the funds, the accelerator programs, and you know the investment opportunities, and so.
And you get innovative companies like Workhound that are starting here and scaling here as well. Hopefully, stay here.
Yeah. So while you know a consumer brand might not want to launch in Chattanooga, Tennessee, like you said, they have resources to help them get to the point where they can go somewhere that makes more sense. Other companies like a Workhound, a logistics-focused company, or you know other types of industry, this is a place where they would probably. When we even see companies moving in, Workhound did, from other parts of the country because this is the better area for that industry. You know, I think Workhound was at Iowa or Idaho or something.
No, they have an office.
They came from the Midwest or the upper Midwest and, you know, relocated to Chattanooga because this is where logistics gets done. And, you know, that's the industry. So any other, you know, viewpoints about entrepreneurship in Tennessee? I've got a follow-on question if you're done with that part, but I don't want to cut you off.
Well, I think another aspect to it that's helped it grow is that I think Chattanooga has kept and maintained what makes it special, and I think a lot of that is its green spaces as well. And people want to move somewhere where they can get out, and you see that because I mean we discussed this a little bit ago that you know. They're high tax areas in California and very expensive, but you still have some of the best innovation out there. Why? Because San Francisco is such a desirable place to live, or you know maybe Portland's a desirable place to live. I think Chattanooga as well is a desirable place to live, and it's helping attract businesses because if they want to bring employees somewhere, do you want to bring them, you know, in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, or do you want to bring them somewhere where you can say, hey, you can go you have Lookout Mountain, you have all these outdoor resources, you have this nice city that we've invested in the architecture. So I think that's a major component.
I think what's great about Chattanooga too, and hopefully this doesn't change, is you see lots of development going on right now. I mean, there's construction projects and redevelopment projects all over, but it's all like on a former industrial site or in a former building that's been abandoned for the last 20 years or something like that. You don't see people clearing trees, you know, clearing lots of green spaces to build new buildings. I think in Chattanooga, like you said, you know, people like it because of the outdoor scene and because of the green spaces. You're just surrounded by it.
Right.
If it got to the point where the development was overtaking the natural surroundings, then you would probably see people feel way different about what's happening.
Right.
So we're at a really nice place right now. Hopefully that doesn't.
And so far the direction of the city with like Lookout Mountain Conservancy is protecting those areas that make it special.
Yep.
And I would just speak more broadly that we have all the building blocks across the entire state. You have financial or fantastic research organizations with the universities, National Lab, St. Jude. You look at what St. Jude's doing in Memphis and how they're, I think, tripling their footprint. You've got large corporations. You have entrepreneurship centers across the state. You have, from our perspective, as corporate attorneys, when we wear our corporate hats, statutes that are very, very flexible and allow for a lot of interesting approaches to how you run your business. The tax aspects here in Tennessee. There are just so many building blocks that you bring these things all together, and you have just a lot of opportunity for getting businesses off, not only in the metropolitan regions, but in the micropolitan regions, which is very exciting for us to see as well.
Sure. And you know, the reason, if you really think about the reason why Tennessee is poised the way it is our politicians have done a pretty fantastic job within our state government of building what we have right now. Do problems exist? Absolutely. But the nice thing is, with the growth and opportunity and the economic environment that we're situated in, there's not a better time to address problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, you hear a lot of people talk about certain subsets of society being left behind, and there's all this innovation and investment and entrepreneur opportunities, but people don't have access. But you also see organizations and programs coming out left and right to help tackle that problem. So, I mean, politicians, our state government, local governments like Hamilton County, if you look back over the last 30 or 40 years, the things Hamilton County have done to make Chattanooga what it is today, you can't count. You know, they've made great decisions and had strong leadership. So, you know, hopefully moving forward, we continue with that same type of leadership. And I really look forward to seeing how all of these, what you would call problems or issues, continue to be faced, because it seems to me like if you calculate the entrepreneurial spirit at, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, and we're at an 8 or a 9 right now, you're also, the people taking on those social problems is also right there, 8 or 9. I mean, mirrors. So you have to feel confident that things are going to move forward in a great way on both sides. I want to get back real quick to talking about intellectual property, you know, your all's areas of expertise. What would you say to a young entrepreneur who, you know, not sure what stage, maybe they've got an idea and they're working on building out a company, or they've launched a company recently, wherever they're at in that cycle, but what would you say to a young entrepreneur who may not understand the significance of intellectual property protection and the things you guys do?
I'll say a little bit on the branding side of it. So if you're starting up and you're thinking of what you're going to name your company, there are a lot of considerations on, you know, doing a search to find out what you want to actually name. Is it trademarkable? Is it already taken? Do you want to invest all of these resources into what that brand is going to be, and then find out later when you look to go get a trademark way down the road that it's taken, or it's already registered, or maybe someone else already has common law rights to it, and then you have to rebrand. So it's starting on the front end with, you know, doing a search and thinking about what is actually, you know, trademarkable as far as your branding goes. And then, and here's a good example, thinking about, because I alluded to it earlier, the intermixing between copyright and trademark rights. So you want a logo, and you go commission a graphic designer to do your logo. And I had an example one time where there were 3 parties, essentially. And you had one guy who had a logo commissioned by a graphic designer, and the brand itself that he had the graphic designer build had scaled pretty large, where he wanted to license that to another third party. But what happened is as he wanted to license it, so he had the trademark rights into it, but the graphic designer had the copyright rights, because they hadn't on the front end had a contract between each other assigning these rights as, you know, as appropriate as
right.
You know. So what happened is as he's working on this deal with a third party to license it. The guy who owns the copyright rights, the designer, comes in and says, no, you can't do that. And so now they're stuck in this, now they got to work out an agreement, and now the 3 parties are having to pay each other, figure out what's going to go on.
Yeah.
And it makes things a lot more complicated down the road. So really just as you're branding, think about all the interplay between these rights, who's owning what, have it all set out on the front end, and don't wait until too far down the road where you're going to have to just completely rebrand because you can't secure any rights.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. It's really important when you have an emerging company, and maybe it's not an emerging type of industry, but maybe it's just a service company. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. We're just a service company. But there's so many things that you have to invest your money in. And we live in a very visual culture right now, and a lot of young entrepreneurs are first investing in the wrapping
Yeah.
of their product or the service. But you cannot forget about what's inside. And if you don't approach it wisely from the outset, then you could lose some of those potential rights that could be incredibly important for scaling, for selling your company, for competition purposes, for getting investment. I mean, some lenders are increasingly monetizing your intellectual property assets, which it's about time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very, very important not to just be focused on the wrapping and the market, but to also think through sort of the nuts and bolts of protecting your product for the long term.
We tell a similar story in the IT industry, really, because when you look at a young emerging company, yes, they're looking at sort of the wrapper. So they're thinking about building their website and launching the software systems that are going to run their accounting and things like that. And the mindset is really, I want to do this in the easiest way possible to help me get started quickly, nimble. And so they're probably going to look at some type of cloud software service to get started on. And what they're not thinking about is, for the long term, is all of the data that I'm going to generate as I conduct business, data about my products and services, about my customers, about all of the transaction history, all of these things that are taking place. All that data is going to live in whatever cloud the company that provides the software has built for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so if 5 years down the road, I need to begin looking and analyzing, looking at my data, analyzing, making key decisions on how my company is going to move forward, I'm probably not going to be able to do that because it lives in 5 or 6 different places because I used SaaS applications to start my company. So,
right.
Kind of the same thing. We're constantly talking to young companies about plan for the long term. It will be okay to use some of these types of applications, but you need to make sure you're doing it in a way that in 5 years or 10 years as your company scales, you're not going to be cut off from all of that key information that's going to drive your company going forward. Mm-hmm. So, very similar. What are the biggest mistakes or missteps you guys typically see around intellectual property?
So Michael mentioned one, just in terms of, we live in a gig economy now.
Yeah.
And so when you're small, I love the lean startup model. But part of being lean is you're outsourcing a lot and delegating.
Yeah.
And if you are not doing that wisely, then you're going to be spreading out your proprietary rights. So engaging early on the people who are building things for you in the correct way to make sure that you own or at least have all rights to what's being developed. Not making misrepresentations. We see this a lot particularly in pitch competitions.
Oh yeah.
To very sophisticated investors, young teams who are misrepresenting their IP portfolios,
mm-hmm.
claiming that they have patents or trademarks, and they actually don't. And that can really get them into hot water in the securities landscape. And so, if you're in one of these pitch competitions and you get a question about your IP and you're not really sure because maybe you don't understand it, maybe you don't know what your attorney's been doing, or maybe you just haven't done anything, just be honest about it. So we see a lot of misrepresentations that I think are going to be causing problems in the very near future. Those are a couple of examples of.
I would assume in that scenario with like the pitch competition, or even if you have a one-on-one meeting with an investor and it's not a part of a larger event, I could see how easy it would be to misrepresent things, because ultimately you just want to say the right thing for the investor to hear to follow through with an investment in your company. And so, you're probably walking a really fine line. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a software provider, whether it's like a marketing or sales or business operations software provider. My background's in a lot of software, and they've, in the initial meetings or the sales process, have talked about, oh, it does this and this and this, and then you end up implementing the software and you're asking, where was that feature you showed? Oh, it's in the pipeline. It's in beta right now. It should be available next quarter or something like. It may never materialize. And so, there's again a misrepresentation that I'm sure that would raise some red flags with you guys if companies were doing things like that.
Sure. And then trading equity. We see a lot of mavericks right now promising equity early on in their startups, and then not really understanding what they're promising, not consulting attorneys or CPAs even about that process. And there's a lot of securities regulation around this, so it's very, very important when starting up and you're saying, oh, well, if you build me this great website, I'll give you 5% of my company. What exactly that means, and what that means for you down the road.
So how do you guys typically engage with an entrepreneur? Because I can speak from the IT industry and some of the challenges we overcome. People look at our building and the sign out front, and they hear about us in the community, and they think this big IT company is too big for me. I'm not there yet. If they're in a very young or starting a company, or even a successful small business that's been going for several years, they'll look at us and think, too big. I just need to find some guy, freelance type IT specialist, who can help me make some decisions. How do you all face things like that, and how do you overcome that?
Well, this can kind of go back to what we were just discussing in mistakes. So LegalZoom is one of them.
Yeah.
And it's a big mistake. And I've seen a lot already, people coming in who have used LegalZoom, whether it's to get their IP or to set up their company, and it's a mess. It's a disaster. It's just formulaic stuff that may have nothing to do with how you're actually going to run your company. They're either way out of compliance, or as far as like trademark prosecution goes, there's a lot of argumentation that goes on afterwards. LegalZoom doesn't take care of that because they're not lawyers, so they will file an application that maybe never should have been filed, and then you're left having spent a ton of money, and then now you're coming to lawyers. So we see a lot of people coming in that have attempted to save on the front end by using some of these services, non-lawyer services, and now they're coming in, and we got to clean it up, and it takes more time once you clean it up, and more time and more money already the sunk cost that you've paid to LegalZoom. So we get a lot of people that come in, and you have to explain now. So maybe next time you invest in that CPA and that lawyer on the front end. It might not be fun when you're sitting there working out all your costs to start up your company, but in 6 months down the road, you'll be thankful. And you might not know that you'll be thankful because that event wouldn't have happened, but it does, and it happens a lot.
Well, that's great. I think we're kind of at a point now where we can wrap up the conversation, but I want to make sure before we sign off that you guys can tell people, if they want to reach out, how would they get in touch with you, and what would that initial conversation look like?
Sure. So feel free to check out our website. As a tech lawyer, instead of buying fine shoes, I impulse buy URLs. So we have a lot of creative URLs that redirect to our site. But venturelaw.org is the simplest one.
You can use our .ninja URL as well.
The .ninjas, we've got a whole bunch of .ninjas.
When they release the new, domain endings, everybody's impulse is, I got to get my. They're just cashing in on that stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But, okay, venturelaw.org, and so what would they be? What would they get out of an initial conversation?
So just some understanding. And we have a few meetings this afternoon just with new clients talking about where they are and what they're trying to do. And it's really just, it's an informal chat, a get to know you, from our perspective, we try and reduce the transactional costs, the seriousness of that. I mean, we have to do our due diligence for conflicts for something like that, but it's just understanding where these businesses want to go, and then doing a little assessment and then providing advice on how we can help them get there.
Yeah, that's great. I know we do a lot of upfront work, just kind of getting to know businesses, learning about what their goals are and things like that. And companies don't have to stroke a big check just to get that basic information. We want to position ourselves to serve them the best we can, and we're willing to make that type of investment up front to provide our resources who can talk to them, learn, help them begin to map out some things. And then when it's time to get serious and start work, then yes, we're going to have a business relationship together. But really what we try to do is position ourselves to where this is a long-term partnership and we're going to provide the best possible value. And so we're willing to invest up front too. So
Yeah.
Sounds like you guys are on the same page with that as well. But thanks for coming out to InfoSystems today, guys. This has been a great conversation. Obviously in the industry InfoSystems serves, it's great for us to know of resources like you guys because we're not lawyers and we don't understand intellectual property. So when we run into instances where customers would gain value out of talking to some legal representation, then this is a great relationship to form. And so hopefully we'll get to continue to converse and talk and build a relationship between our organizations moving forward.
Absolutely.
And just like you guys, we're really committed to the community as well. So I'm sure we'll be bumping into you at community events and all types of stuff in the future. But thanks so much, and great episode. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thank you very much.